Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Take a minute and think of all of the new patients that you've seen in your practice for the last 5 or 10 years. If you're the average dentist, you're seeing about 30 new patients a month or 360 new patients per year. So if you've been practicing 10 years, that's 3,600 patients, 5,400 if you've been practicing 15, and 7,200 if you've been open for 20. And keep in mind, that's just if you're average, 30 new patients a month. If it's more, these numbers only get bigger. And sure, you're going to lose some of these patients. They're going to leave the practice. But how many? When I survey a room full of dentists, the number 20% seems to be the agreed upon or acceptable attrition rate. So again, if you've been practicing 10 years, seeing that average 30 new patients a month, if you subtract that 20% attrition rate, you should still have 2,880 active patients. Let's call it 2,900 for simplicity's sake. So how would this translate into real numbers in your practice if you have 2,900 active patients? Well, let's start with hygiene. With 2,900 active patients, that would translate into at least 5,800 recall appointments per year. Now, obviously, it would be more if some of these patients are on 3 and 4 month recall. To make it simpler, if your office was closed 2 weeks per year, open 50 weeks, and you had 5,800 recall appointments, that would be 116 recall appointments per week. And keep in mind, I'm just talking about recall. I'm not talking about scaling and root planning or, any type of soft tissue management or any other patients your hygienist might be seeing, new patients, things like this. I'm just talking about recall patients. So we'd have 116 recall patients a week. And if the average hygienist can see 8 patients a day, that's 14 and a half days of recall hygiene. Most likely, if you have a strong soft tissue management program and you're seeing new patients in hygiene, that's probably closer to 16 days of hygiene a week. And if you're open 4 days a week, in other words, 4 full-time hygienists. All right, bit of a long intro there, but how do you measure up? Again, if you're the average dentist that's been in practice for 10 years, you maybe have 1 or possibly 2 full-time hygienists, and you may have trouble keeping them busy. And keep in mind, you should have 4. So where is everybody? Where are all the patients? Well, it sounds to me like they've become, quote unquote, inactive. Would you agree? So what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to purge these charts? I hate using that word, but that's the word that's been used. Or do we work on getting them back into the practice, reactivating them, so to speak? Well, I think you know my answer to that question, and that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And for this week's episode, we're going to do a deep dive on the subject of reactivation and keeping your patient base active. It's going to be sort of a definitive guide. We're going to look at things you should be doing to reactivate inactive patients and as well as how to keep patients from becoming inactive. This is truly one of those things where the effort you and your team expend now can pay massive dividends for the rest of your career. So where do we start? Well, you first have to look at if you have an actual problem, and if so, how bad it might be. So what you'd want to look at, there's 2 different ways to do this. In other words, where do you stand? How active or inactive is your patient base? There's a simple way, and there's a little bit more complex and exact way to do this. Let's start with the simple way. Simplest thing to do would be to look at your software and look at, out of all of your patients, how many of those patients have a next visit date after today. Okay? So not a difficult report to pull. If you don't know how and you've got Dentrix, EagleSoft, Open Dental, whatever, you can probably call support and get them to help you pull this report very easily. So let's say you pull, your report and you have 5,000 patients and 800 patients have a next visit after today. Well, that shows you're only at about 16% active. It also means that 4,200 patients are, who the heck knows where they are or they don't have a next visit date. A more exact way of doing this would be by using something we call the hygiene formula. It's a spreadsheet I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. You fill in 3 basic numbers and it gives you your exact hygiene compliance rate. It tells you exactly how much of your patient base is active. And obviously this episode is, being that we're talking about patient activity or how active your patients are, this is more targeted to general or GPs, general dentists. But because, you have a hygiene program, you're not going to say you have a hygiene program if you're an oral surgeon, right? You just won't. But the hygiene formula is very useful. The only thing I will mention about it, in my intro, I mentioned the 20% attrition rate, which most people average. The hygiene formula that you download accounts for a 40% attrition rate, meaning, so you would run it against your entire career. If you've been in practice for 16 years, you take total charts, you subtract 40% instead of the 20%. So it basically allows for a large margin of error there, in other words. And even when I have people use this or doctors use this hygiene formula, they'll still find that their hygiene compliance rate, even after subtracting 40% of their patient base, is still terrible. So you have those 2 ways. How many people have an next visit, or have a look at the hygiene formula. Again, it's a free download. I'll put the link to it on the episode webpage. If you want help with this, or you're having difficulty figuring it out, or you just don't want to look at the number, here's what I'd recommend. You may or may not, if you've been listening for a while, you'll remember a fellow named Jeff Santone. He's our vice president for expansion here at MGE. I'm going to just give you Jeff's email. It's Jeff S, Jeffs, at mgeonline.com. You can go ahead and email Jeff. Jeff is happy to help you with this stuff, to help you figure it out. So once you've done that, you have a generalized idea of how bad is it? How many inactive patients do I actually have? And this is going to become important later when you start figuring out what type of actions you should be taking to resolve this. And one thing I should mention now is 2 things. Number one, it's you've probably heard me talk about this before if you're a longtime listener. We put a ton of effort into getting new patients in the dental industry. If you look, probably the most searched for marketing keyword with regards to dental practice management is dental marketing. A lot of people out there do it. So there's a lot of effort, attention, drive to get in a ton of new patients. And I'm not in disagreement with that. You should be getting a ton of new patients. Okay. But the amount of money you're going to spend to get a new patient is way more than you would spend to reactivate a patient. And it's unfortunate how the model's set up, or how most offices are set up. You spend, let's say, costs you $350 to get a new patient off of a postcard marketing campaign or a Google Ads campaign. So you went through all this effort, you converted them well at the front desk, patient shows up, you recommend whatever treatment you're going to recommend, they accept it, or maybe they accept some of it, then you put them on the hygiene schedule and they don't keep their appointment. And then they sort of drift off into the ether and nobody really puts any effort to get that patient back. Instead, all of our effort is on getting more new patients. Well, how much money do you think you'd have to spend to get that patient back into your practice? What if it took 5 phone calls? Let's say it took an hour of phone time from one of your higher paid employees. Let's say you're paying this employee $38 an hour and it took 5 phone calls for a total of an hour to get this patient back on the schedule. Well, you spent $38 to get them back on the schedule. And this is a patient who still needs work, as opposed to $350, which is what you spent to get them originally. And it's a big waste. This happens a lot. It's one of the worst parts of the dental business process when you look at how private practices are managed in the United States. It's handled terribly. Tons of money spent to get the new patient in, very little spent to keep the patient active and staying with the practice. The other side of that is, you could probably think of this, and if you can't, I'll give you a little exercise you can do. Go get your incomplete treatment list. Scan the names on the incomplete treatment list. See if you find somebody from 2-3 years ago that you remember real well. It's Bill Jones. There's Bill Jones. He was a really nice guy. He had, a couple inlays and a crown that you had treatment planned, and he never went through with it. And maybe he did some other work. Maybe he was maximizing insurance, whatever, right? So then Bill was scheduled for his next hygiene appointment and he never showed up. So he stays on your incomplete treatment list. Very little effort is spent trying to get Bill back. Here's my question for you. If you were to get Bill back, do you think it would be easier to sell Bill on the balance of his treatment, or selling to a new patient? Like to convince them to proceed with treatment? In most cases, having a patient of record or getting a patient of record to proceed with additional treatment is a lot easier than getting a new patient to do it, because they know you. You already have a rapport with this patient. They know who you are. And funnily enough, these patients who haven't been there for 3, 4, 5 years, you may think have found another office. They've gone off and done something else. They don't want to come back to your practice. Who knows what, right? In many cases, these patients still think of you as their dentist, or at least you would hope they would. And that's evidenced by the fact you've probably had patients show up that you haven't seen in 3, 4, 5 years. And you're, wow, Bill, it's been 5 years since we've seen you. No, has it been that long? Yeah, it was 2019 last time you were in. No, really? In their mind, for the last 5 years, you were their dentist. They got busy and they weren't thinking about it. But you, because you don't hear from Bill, are thinking that Bill doesn't want to come back. Bill hates the practice. Bill has found another dentist, insert reason. So you'd be surprised, patients who aren't there, regardless of what you might think. And this is just sort of human nature. It's what happens to us. We think that he's gone somewhere else, but actually he hasn't. He just got busy and, life's priorities take over, and maybe he's not put enough priority on his oral health, which, with some education you can help him do. So those two things are important to think with. So the amount of, not only is it good for the patient to get them back in, especially if you've done work on them to make sure the work is being maintained, it also increases your retention. It increases your hygiene program. It helps you achieve the purpose of the practice. And then just from a straight statistical perspective, patients of record are easier to sell, for lack of a better word. And patients of record are going to be more responsive when you contact them than a new patient because they already have an established relationship. All right. So first thing here, we found out where you were. How bad of a situation do we have as far as inactive patients? So now, before we jump into contacting these people, the first thing we have to know is, when would we deactivate a chart? I did an episode on this way early in the podcast. It was very short. But when would you say, okay, I'm making this chart inactive officially? Certain software has that capacity where you make them quote unquote inactive. Well, to be clear, there's only a few reasons that you should deactivate a chart. And this flies right in the face, by the way, of what you may have heard over the years. I remember when I first entered the dental industry, it was, you did chart audits, and if the patient hadn't been in for 2 years, you purged that chart. That was the word that was used. Not a very good choice of words, but whatever. You purged it. So this could be somebody that your office called 2 times because everybody was busy. Patient never responded. And we just got rid of the chart. We stopped calling them, and they went in the doctor's basement, especially when we were on paper charts. So that's a terrible idea. And from a business perspective, it's one of the, maybe this is a strong word to use, one of the stupidest ideas I've ever heard. No other business does that. Any other store you go to, if you think of all the emails, when you've left your email address with the store, when you've made a purchase, if you don't show up for a year, it's not like they stop emailing you or sending you catalogs. They're always going to email you and send you catalogs because you gave them your name. The same thing applies with patients. We're going to continue to contact them because we want to service them. But when would we go, you know what? Let's deactivate this chart. Well, there's a few reasons. First one is the patient does not want to come back. Now, this could take a couple of different forms. Let's say they don't like your office. They don't like you. They don't ever want to come back. Fine. They can go. Now, what if they say, doctor, you were participating in my plan. Let's say you were in an HMO and you drop it and they go, doc, I'd really love to come here, but I just can't. I need to find another doctor in my plan. Fine. We're going to deactivate that, but we're going to do something a little special. I'll tell you about here in a minute. But essentially, patient has voiced openly, I'm not coming back. Now, a couple things about this. Let's say I have somebody on the phone doing reactivation and they call a patient and they say, I'm not coming back. Would I let this employee decide that, fine, we're just going to deactivate this chart? Well, that really depends. If this employee is my office manager or maybe my scheduler who's been with me for a while and understands how I operate my practice, yeah, that might be okay. But even then, I would want a line, meaning a progression, that something follows, or like a routing slip, whatever you want to call it, that any patient deactivations need to follow. For a few reasons. First off, let's say one of your reactivation people call me and I answer the phone. I go, yeah, I've been thinking about it. I really don't want to come back to this office. Well, why not? Well, I wasn't really happy with my last visit. Well, I wouldn't leave it there. Maybe the person doing the reactivation can't go any further. Maybe it's a newer employee. That should get routed to the office manager or the doctor. The doctor may look at it and go, oh, it's Jeff. I remember Jeff. Jeff, hey, I heard you spoke to Sally at my office and said you didn't want to come back. Well, yeah, the last time I was there, your hygienist really upset me. Well, who was that? In other words, you might actually have a chance at handling me, the doctor or the office manager, because you're going to know me. And I wouldn't want somebody walking around out in the world upset with my business for no good reason, especially for a reason that was created by my business. So you're going to want a line that any deactivations follow. And there's a big reason for this, because I've seen people hire people to do reactivation, have no line, have no routing. So you have some newer staff member, patient says they don't want to come back, click inactive, click inactive, click inactive. I may just have the person who's on the phone may just be really terrible at calling people on the phone, and they might be pissing people off when they call. I don't want them to have the power to deactivate. They can tell me, make a note in the software. Patient says they don't want to come back for any reasons that I listed. It then goes on the doctor's desk with some type of a routing slip or something where the doctor can then call me, or the office manager can call me and find out what's going on, and at least resolve the upset to the best of their ability, or possibly get me back. So that's reason number one. Patient has voiced they are not coming back. Reason number two, you would deactivate a chart, is you don't want the patient back. And obviously, you have to follow your Dental Practice Act. If you're going to dismiss a patient, your local dental society will have a copy, or your state association. You could usually find it online even, but your state association will have a copy, or the state board. So if you want to deactivate a patient, you want to dismiss a patient, that is well within your rights. You want to make sure that you follow the letter of the law. I usually recommend, if somebody wants to dismiss a patient, that they speak to their malpractice carrier, because usually, at least the ones that I found when I've recommended this, the attorneys at the malpractice insurance company are usually happier to find out you're not being sued and you just want some advice for best practices. And they can tell you what to do to make sure that you're not guilty of abandonment or anything along those lines. So you don't want this patient back at your practice. That's another reason to deactivate, but make sure you follow the letter of the law. And our third reason is the patient is deceased. They've passed away, in which case, obviously, their chart is going to get deactivated. So really, it comes down to three reasons. They voiced they're not coming back, you don't want them back, or they've passed away. That's it. I've even had cases where patient has moved out of state and they don't get deactivated because they visit their home state every 3 to 6 months and they just see the dentist every time that they're there. You probably have cases like this where someone moved 2-3 hours away and regularly comes back to the practice. Now, I mentioned, what about that patient who says, you dropped my plan. I would love to keep coming here, but I can't come back. Well, those I wouldn't cease all contact with. The patient who says, I'm never coming back. They've spoken to the doctor, and it's just some irresolvable difference. Fine, we deactivate the chart. We don't contact that patient anymore. We keep the records for as long as we're legally obligated and things of that nature. Fine. But patient says, I really love the office, but you dropped my PPO or HMO, so therefore I have to go to an in-network doctor. I would probably take those folks off of active recall. Like, I'm not going to continuously try to contact them. And you'll hear more about this as I get into the methodology of reactivation. But what I would do is, if I have a newsletter or any practice mailings, I would keep them on that list. Now, why? In many cases, again, you will have subjective reality on this if you've been in network and dropped plans. You will have patients who leave your office because you went out of network. They go to another practice that's in network. They hate it, and they come back to your practice because they don't mind paying the fee difference because they really love your office. So I want to stay foremost in the patient's mind throughout that whole period. So I'm not going to expend staff time and labor calling them necessarily, because the patient's made it very clear they need to go to an in-network dentist. But what's another piece of mail? Cost me 60, 70 cents to send them a copy of my newsletter. I am going to continue to send them that, and they're going to continue to see and keep me in mind that I was once their dentist, and you will recover some of those patients. And this is something where you want to regularly communicate to your patient base, which I'll get into here in a second. But that's something I do. So not necessarily active recall, but they would stay on the mailing list. Patient who says, I'm never coming back, and you just can't sort it out, you can take them off the mailing list. That's fine. Obviously, if a patient's deceased, you would take them off the mailing list. But those who dropped, or ones you don't want to see, off the mailing list. But these patients who left because of, a network issue, definitely keep them at least on the mailing list. All right. So you found out how bad it is. You have an idea of when you would or would not deactivate a patient. And most importantly, you've established a deactivation routing or line that goes through the OM and doc, or OM or doc, so that someone with authority and knowledge of this patient actually looks at this chart before we deactivate it. So now, what do you do to start reactivating your patient base? Well, number one, that's going to depend on how bad of a problem that you have. If you have 4, 5, 6,000 charts that are inactive, that's a lot of work, and I'll get into this here in a second as far as how much effort we're going to put in. But would I wait till I hired a bunch of people to do anything about it? Absolutely not. I would want to start doing something right now. So this is where you start with your whole group. So you might have a staff meeting and you're going to do something we call an all hands action, which, literally means what it sounds like all hands on deck. Everybody's going to contribute to this reactivation effort. Okay. And this is regardless of how many charts you have that are inactive. And we'll get into some numbers here in a minute. But let's say I got 5,000 inactive charts. Fine, I'm still starting with an all-hands effort. Let's say I have 9 or 10 staff. I have my staff meeting. I go, folks, look, we have 5,000 charts. Only 800 or 900 of our patients are active. We need to go after and get those 41 or 4,200 patients back. So we need to put some effort in on this. So where would I put my focus initially? Well, the first place I would put our focus would probably be on patients that are inactive, meaning they have no next visit date, on the incomplete treatment list, because you're going to get the biggest return for that initially. If I have a big old incomplete treatment list, and let's say, I don't know, there's 1,500 patients on there. I have 5,000 total charts that are or 5,000 total charts, 4,200 that are inactive, and 1,500 of those 4,200 are on the incomplete treatment list. We're going to focus on those 1,500 now, because if we start populating hygiene with these folks, we're going to end up potentially with some more treatment presentations, which could help increase practice revenues, and these patients need treatment. So then get everybody pumped up about this. We're going to get our patient base active. And the way I would pump everybody up, and look, I'm not a big let's pump everybody up. I'm very much one of those people where if I have to motivate you to do your job, something's wrong, right? But I do believe in orienting everybody towards the purpose of why they're doing it. So you probably have some form of a practice mission or a practice purpose that you post on the wall or you've disseminated to your staff. I would orient them to that. If your job is to, as a practice, you want to resolve patients' oral health because that affects systemic health and the quality of life and potentially their lifespan, which is plenty of studies on that. And we're all about helping patients. And you want to, basically restore their oral health so they never need further restorative work. You teach them good oral hygiene. You also teach them good home care and they take care of their teeth. Obviously, it would be worded a little bit more eloquently than I'm rolling out here, but you get the general idea. So in order to do that, you have to have patients showing up at the practice. If patients don't show up and see regularly, you can't achieve your purpose. So that's what you orient everybody towards. That's why we're going after those 4,200 inactive patients, or at least the 1,500 on the incomplete treatment list, because we're their doctor and our job is to help them restore their health. So now, what you have to do next is you're going to have some staff that already know how to make a hygiene appointment and know all the ins and outs of it, most likely your front desk staff, possibly your hygienists, if they end up doing any recall. But then you're going to have some staff who've never done reactivation calls, like maybe dental assistants and things like this. And they're going to have to be at least trained somewhat on how to make a reactivation call or a hygiene call. And whoever does it currently in the office could easily and quickly train them. Again, it might be someone at the front, might be a hygienist, et cetera, might be the office manager. The other thing is you'd have to train them how to use the computer if they're not used to using the computer to schedule appointments. Again, all of this training I'm discussing, especially for a dental assistant who's already familiar with dentistry in the practice, will probably take all of 20 minutes. It's not a very long thing to do. You can role play with them a little bit as far as what you do if a patient does this or that or whatever, how you answer these questions or how to schedule it, and so on. But you're going to want to train everybody on how to make these appointments so that everybody there knows how to make these appointments. And then you need to figure out when people are going to make these calls. It might be an hour a week, might be 2 hours a week. You figure it out around the schedule so that they can do it. And then what I'd recommend doing from there is a little bit of a flow chart. I know this sounds maybe a little bit complex, but you're with me so far, right? As far as, we're training people how to make an appointment and how to use the computer. But I do a little bit of a flow chart only because you don't want people getting tongue-tied or confused when they call people. Okay. So again, we're targeting our incomplete treatment list, and people on that list, especially people with no next visit date, because that's who we want to start calling. If they have a next visit date and they're on the incomplete treatment list, they might be on next Tuesday's schedule. We don't need to call those people. It's the people who are unscheduled on the incomplete treatment list, right? So in those cases, they're going to fall into, in most cases, one of 4 categories. Either A, they're not overdue for hygiene, in which case we just need to set up the next hygiene visit. B, they are overdue, but it's less than, 2 or 3 years. C, they're overdue and it's more than 3 years. Or D, we have patients who, let's say it was a new patient who came in, saw the doctor, and the treatment recommended began with some form of soft tissue management, scaling and root planing, and the patient didn't accept. So they never made it to the hygiene schedule. Okay. So we've got not overdue, overdue under 2 years, overdue over 2 years, and patients who never made it in the hygiene schedule in the first place because they were recommended for some type of periotherapy and never did it. So you have to train the staff on how you want them to handle each. Obviously, if they're not overdue, you just schedule the hygiene appointment. If there's a time factor, they're overdue, but it's under 2 years, over 2 years. This is where it depends on what's happening in your state. In certain states, the hygienist can't touch them for any type of active treatment. They can do diagnostics unless the doctor looks at them first if they're overdue for more than 2 years or a year. It depends on your state law, and this is where you're going to have to get familiar because that's going to affect your little flow chart, right? It may also affect the appointment time. Certain cases, after 3 years, they may need a whole new initial exam. So these are things you're going to want to discuss before you put people on the phone so that everybody's on the same page and doesn't get confused when they're calling patients. The last category, patient came in, saw a doctor recommended treatment, including periotherapy. They never made it onto hygiene. Those patients should probably be scheduled to just come back and see the doctor for an exam again. Keep it real simple, okay? That's how I would do it, all right? So you got those 4 categories, and now you're going to let people loose. You figure out when people are going to be on the phone. I would set some targets. Look, we want to schedule X amount of patients per week so we can start adding to our hygiene schedule and getting these patients back. And the last thing before you let people loose is you need to take a look at your hygiene availability. Now, this is important only because let's say I've got 8 or 9 staff. Everybody's pumped up about doing this. We're going to get all these patients back. We've generated our incomplete treatment list of patients that have no next visit. Okay. And we're ready to just go for it. And then, there's no hygiene openings for the next 2 months. So think about that for a second. So it's going to be a bit anticlimactic. Hey, want to get you back in. When's your next available appointment? March. Yeah, it's not going to work. So you need to make sure you have some hygiene availability. There's so many different ways this may manifest in a practice. I can give you some ideas, but this is something that you have to handle on an individual basis. You might have some openings this week, next week, the week after, in which case, fine. Then that's going to work. You may have no openings for 2 months, in which case you might have to add an extra day of hygiene to account for all of this. If you're a bit nervous about that because you don't want to add a hygienist with no patients to see, then what you do is you pick a day 6 weeks from now and just start filling that day and get a temp if you need to for that day. Maybe it's Tuesday of every week and it's Tuesday, the week, 1 week after the other till you fill it. But you need to have some availability. Otherwise, all of these reactivation efforts are going to fall flat because there's nowhere to put people. So obviously that's important. I would also make this a multifaceted approach. I wouldn't just do phones. I would have texts, emails, snail mail. Hey, it's been a while since these can be personalized letters from whoever called these people, as well as phone calls, as well as some form of a practice newsletter. Now this should be something with a practice newsletter. I would keep it real simple. 11 by 17 folded over twice. It's like it ends up being a large postcard side. 11 by 17 is like 2 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. The big, I don't know if that paper has a name, the big 11 by 17 paper. You see it. It folds down twice and you have a newsletter. I personally prefer those homemade newsletters rather than the canned ones. I think they're a bit more real and I tend to read them, especially if I'm familiar with the organization. So, and these can be really simple. They can be announcements about what's going on in the practice. And we just hired a new associate. Hey, this is our new staff member. Hey, our assistant Jenny just had a baby. Various announcements about the practice. There can be a really short article from the doctor on something interesting. How periodontal disease affects cardiovascular health. That's interesting, as I sounded out to myself. Things like that. Oral care for kids under 5, things like that. Some type of an article, news about the practice, any type of a new patient special. Bring your friends in and they can save this much. Or you might have some type of seasonal special that you're running. There's, X amount off of whitening. There's different things that you can put in this newsletter. But I would send that newsletter out quarterly to your entire mailing list, including those patients who left your practice because you're out of network now. That's what you're mailing to them regularly, okay? Not the patients who said they never want to come back and you don't want to see again. They don't get this. But the patients that aren't on active recall would also get this, as well as the inactive patients that should be in there, okay? So I'm making my calls. I don't reach somebody. I might text. I might email them. I might send them a personal letter. Hey, Joe, I was trying to reach you. It's been about 2 years since we've last seen you. We really need to get you in here to get your teeth cleaned. Please give us a call to get scheduled, okay? And there's different things you can do to expand your reach on this. I've had Dan Brown on here before. You might remember Danny's like our resident marketing expert, and he's a partner at Bloomberg Digital, which is a digital marketing agency. And they have a really cool Reactivation texting program, which is very reasonably priced. I'll put a link to it here on the episode webpage. You might want to check that out because they can do bulk text to your entire patient base. Also, if you can, and this is something you should check to see if you have the capability to do this or not, certain softwares as well as, phone systems or patient analytics software or patient management software have the capacity to allow patients to book directly into your schedule. For instance, Addit or something called Care Crew. It's another program that does this, where, in other words, I get a text from you or an email from you and there's a link. So let's say I get an email or a text saying, hey, Jeff, you're overdue for your checkup. We'd love to get you back in to see the hygienist as soon as possible. Obviously, it could sound a little bit better than that. I'm just throwing this out here. And it has a link. Please click here to make an appointment. So I click that link, and what most people have is I can request an appointment, which is, whatever. That's better than nothing. But what I prefer is this. They have it set up to where you click that link, it drives the patient to your website, and there's like a little what they call a widget, which is like a little it's a programming thing. Don't worry about it. But they install a widget on your website. And what that does is it talks to your patient management software, your EagleSoft, Dentrix, or whatever. It pulls the hygienists up on screen. So I would like to make a cleaning. Which hygienist would you like to see? So let's say you have two. You have Jane and you have Sally. Well, I'm going to see Sally. That's who I always see. Then it'll give me Sally's schedule. Well, Sally has a 3:00 next Thursday. I can click that and I make the appointment. I would do that if you can. I think that would knock out a lot of the easy to schedule people and it would avert having to make a phone call. Now, most of these softwares are set up so that when they make the appointment, it's not like they immediately get written into EagleSoft or Dentrix. But when you come, let's say they did it at night when you weren't there. When you come in the morning, you see that, Jeff wants to make an appointment with Sally next Thursday at 3:00. Accept? Yes, I accept. So now Jeff gets his confirmation that he has his appointment with Sally. Okay? Depending on how you set it up. I would try to have something like that. I think it would avoid, maybe not avoid, but it would save you phone calls to probably 10 or 20% even of these inactive patients. And this is something to think with. You're probably familiar with the term low-hanging fruit. Well, you're going to have a considerable amount of low-hanging fruit amongst your inactive patient base, meaning patients who really don't need much to schedule, may have even been on their mind lately, they just have forgotten to call you, then they get your text or your email, and then boom, they just go ahead and schedule. If they can schedule electronically, I would by all means make it easy for them to do that. That being said, people look at this and they go, oh yeah, this is going to handle my entire inactive patient base. No, it will not. It absolutely will not. You got to roll up your sleeves and do it the old-fashioned way. You're going to have to get on the phone. You have to get on the phone, you have to text, you have to email. Some people might take 10 phone calls before they schedule. But even then, you're still spending less than going and getting a new patient. Plus, you're keeping your patients active, which is really what this is all about. So now the question becomes, you've got your staff going at least on this incomplete treatment list with no next visit date, but you still have 2,000-3,000 inactive patients. Well, do we need to hire somebody? Well, let's do some basic numbers here for a second. Let's take a number. Let's say you have 5,000 inactive patients. So my first question to you, and this may or may not be something you're familiar with, in which case you can check this with one of your staff, is how many people could you call in a given day? Considering you might be texting and also emailing some of these people. If your job was just to reactivate, how many phone calls would you make a day? Well, most people are going to answer 100. I could see 150. But again, I could make 200 phone calls, but I might not be talking to anybody, in which case, what's the point? If I'm talking to people, my phone call numbers are going to go down, but hopefully my appointments will go up. But let's say 100 people a day. If I have 5,000 inactive patients and I could make 100 phone calls a day, it's going to take me 50 business days to run through my entire list. Meaning, if you work 17 days a month, it's going to take close to 3 months before I cycle through my list. That's too long. I mean, ideally, I'd love to see people getting called every week until they schedule or tell me they're not going to schedule. I think that's not too excessive to where you become a pest. I think several times a day might be a bit rough, right? Or every day might even be a bit rough. It's all what's real to you here. But let's say we at least wanted to call them every week. Well, then I'd have to make 5,000 phone calls a week for my practice. And if I can only make 100 a day and I'm working 5 days a week with one person, that means I need 10 people. That might also be unreal. But you're getting the idea. Like the amount of effort that you're actually going to have to expend to reach this patient base might be a lot more than you're considering that you need. And this is one of these things where what I normally recommend if someone looks at this, they have 5, 6, 10,000 inactive patients, and they're confronting how much effort it would really take to reach all these people. And they go, Jeff, there's no way I'm going to go hire 5 or 10 people. Then what I suggest is this: go hire 1 or 2. It's an entry-level position and have them start doing some reactivation. Generally speaking, you can train somebody to do reactivation in a day. It's not very difficult because for a number of reasons. Number one, it's sort of ingrained in everybody's head that they're supposed to see the dentist at least twice a year, number one. Not just the staff member that you're asking to call, but the patients that they're calling. Okay. Number two, getting your teeth cleaned is considered a good thing to do. Most people are thinking it's something that they should be doing to maintain their health. So it's not like you're asking them to schedule a patient for some complex surgical procedure. The appointment times always or generally tend to be similar as well. So it's not a very complex procedure to teach them. And I would definitely recommend, if you're in the hiring process for administrative staff, that's the first thing that you have people do. Generally, when people hire a new administrative staff member, the first thing they have them do is answer the phones, which is a huge mistake because you're spending tons of money on your marketing, and then a patient calls in, or a prospective patient, and they're talking to somebody who doesn't know, which way is up. They're brand new to the practice. Very bad idea. Your receptionist is your partner in marketing. So if I hired somebody new, and I wanted to see if they could actually get a product, if they could produce, I put them on some reactivation. They get on the phone, they make some phone calls, they schedule some patients. I go, okay, this person is capable of getting a product. I can use them within my organization. If I hire somebody, I put them on the phone and they can't schedule a hygiene appointment after a few days, they're probably not going to make it on any other job that I give them. So why would I keep them? Do you see? It's a good way for them to cut their teeth. That's kind of funny being this is a dental podcast. And it shows you whether the person is capable of getting a product or not. And if you ended up, let's say you got 5,000 charts and you hired 3 people, and these 3 people clean up your entire inactive patient base, that's amazing. You go, well, gosh, what am I going to do with them then? Well, one of them will probably become your hygiene coordinator because hygiene's now super busy because you've reactivated thousands of patients. And if they're all that good, you'll find something for them to do. Trust me on that. They could do practice PR. Who knows, right? It really doesn't matter. If someone is productive, you'll always find something for them to do. And if you can inactivate all those thousands of patients, that bakes in immediate growth for the practice. You're seeing you have 1.5 full-time hygienists, and now you have 4. Well, you as a solo practitioner aren't going to be able to handle that anymore. You're going to need an associate. You see, it spurs practice growth. And keep something else in mind. 70% of your revenue should be coming from patients of record, not just your hygiene revenues, but the treatment that your patients of record need. Okay. So this is definitely a key growth multiplier. If you can, take care of it in your business, it's also a great place to start new employees because the learning curve is very simple. It also tells you if an employee is worth investing time into. And it's something that, I would take a serious look at in your business. Other businesses do. We at MGE here do for our business. And you talk to any other business, this is something that's important to them, customer retention. For some reason, it's just gone by the wayside in the dental industry. But the practices that really make this a priority tend to, grow a lot more stably and consistently. Anyway, a lot there, a longer than usual episode. I think I'm close to the 40-minute mark here. If I look at my timer, yeah, I'm about 40 minutes. But it's something that I think you should take seriously. That's why I went over all of this stuff here in the episode. If you have questions about it, you can always email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. Don't forget I have the links to, I've got the Bloomberg Digital link. I also have the link to the hygiene formula that you can check out if you want to really grade how you guys are doing with this. And if you need any help of any kind, don't forget also you can email Jeff Santone, jeffs@mgeonline.com. If you need any help with your practice too, or if you want to find out more about us here at MGE, you can email us at info@mgeonline.com, or find us at mgeonline.com, or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.